And his determination has led us to this point. T-minus 34 minutes and 19 seconds, which, when you account for about 20 minutes of expected built-in hold time that NASA likes to do, means that the launch is scheduled in about 55 minutes, and so far there's nothing stopping it. Walter.
You know, we met a lot of people here this morning, past astronauts, present astronauts, some of the pioneers of the space program and the launch teams. I'd like to introduce now another hero of the early days, a pioneer of space around here. The fellow, his name is Henry Landworth, and he spent his youth, unfortunately, in one of the concentration camps of Hitler's, Auschwitz. Came to this country as a survivor after that terrible experience. Found his way to Cocoa Beach, where he was the first manager of one of the first motels at Cocoa Beach, just as the space age was brimming. And he became a close friend of all of the astronauts, the pioneer astronauts, the Mercury 7, who stayed at his hotel, and all of us news people who stayed at his hotel. He was a hero to all of us. And Henry, it's delightful to have you here today. I know you're now a very successful hotelier in Orlando and elsewhere. John Glenn is a fellow investor with you in your hotels, and he's a very dear friend of yours. We heard a moment ago from Jimmy Buffett, who was also one of our guests here just a moment ago, about trying to go fishing out here. And I was reminded that Gordon Cooper once took advantage of your hospitality to go fishing.
Yes, he did. I came one morning to the hotel, and Gordon was sitting on the side of the pool with a fishing pole. And I walked over to Gordon. I said, Gordon, what in the world are you doing? I said, I came here to fish. I got some time, so I'm going to fish. And I looked down to the pool, and there's 4 fish. I said, stop it. This is a pool, Gordon. I said, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to fish. And he went out fishing. Nothing could stop him.
Where did he get the fish?
I have no idea. There were 4 of them in that pool.
Well, he must have supplied his own fish, I gather. That was your conclusion, wasn't it? You know, there were a lot of practical jokes played on you, and you played it on them. Yes. It was a game of practical jokes. Tell me about the towel episode with John Glenn.
One day I heard John Glenn came to the lobby, pounded on the desk, and said, what is going on with this hotel? I don't get any towels in my room. And I walked out. I said, John, quiet down. I mean, people are hearing you. Please stop. He says, no, you're going to give me the towels. I'm going to demand, and he just makes a racket of the thing. So he went on his mission. He came back, and I put about 2.5-ton truck of towels in his room. He couldn't get into the room. He couldn't open the door. And then he called me up and says, get me out of the room, Henry. I'm sorry about the towels. So that was the story.
Henry, we've talked much about the delays of MA6, John Glenn's flight. He made it finally on the 11th attempt. It was set up 10 times before he actually got off. 3 times he was suited up, twice at the top of the pad.
Right.
But you had your problems with those delays of that flight, didn't you?
Big one. Big one. I felt that I really wanted to do something for John Glenn. And he has been my best friend now for 38 years. And I was determined to do something that nobody else will do. So I decided I will build him a cake, bake him a cake of the exact measurements of the capsule, which was 6 feet wide and 9 feet tall. And everything was set till the next day. My chef comes into my office and says, we went along with this, you request, and we all for it. There's only one problem. When we built that cake 6 feet wide, wouldn't get to the door of our kitchen. So I said, well, there must be a way. So what we went ahead and hired a big truck, I don't know, the biggest truck we could get, and we were assembling that cake in that truck. It was a pound cake and a fruit cake. And that cake was ready to be rolled out. McDonnell Aircraft was giving us, actually built us a lift, special lift for the cake. And when John went up to space, that cake was supposed to be rolled out when he was coming down to Earth. So I called Charlie Buckley, who is the who was at that time the chief of security. I said, Charlie, I want to get that cake out to the Cape, and we're going to cut this with all the dignitaries and everything. And I just told him, listen, Charlie, this is important. He says, no, it's not important at all. I'm tired of this cake. You're never going to come to the Cape, and there's no way you're going to poison 2,000-3,000 people with that stupid cake. Well, anyway, I said, Charlie, I'm going to make a deal with you. You send me 2 dietitians from the astronauts, and one of them was Finkelstein. I'm sure you knew it. And he did that. Now, if that cake is good, would you allow me to come out? And that cake was good. And we rolled it out to the Cape, and Mr. McDonald, Gilroot, all the boys were cutting that cake, and it was a big celebration. It was fun.
Well, Henry, thank you very much. You were a hero to us news people, I can tell you, because in those early days, before NASA took over the space program, and it was a U.S. Air Force effort, the Air Force felt very heavily about security, naturally, because they were thinking of weaponry rather than man in space, and they wouldn't let us onto the Cape at all. So we had to stand on a granite fairway out there by Port Canaveral. Cold, miserable, all night long. We wouldn't know until the lights went on that they were about to launch one of their experimental rockets. But we'd have to be out there, our poor cameramen there, keeping their eyes glued on that lighted, and we didn't know when it had been scrubbed, because the light stayed on. It might have been scrubbed for hours, and we'd still be out there all night long waiting. But we complained about this quite a lot around the bars. Henry overheard us, and he found the answer. He knew how to tell us whether the mission had been scrubbed or not. When the engineers all came in from the Cape and went to the bar, he knew that the mission had been scrubbed. He sent a messenger out to us, and we were able to join them at the bar. Henry, thanks a lot. Good luck to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks for inviting me.
That's what I call a reliable source. Stay seated for a second. We're going to take a break. When we return, the President of the United States is here. He's at the Launch Control Center. We're going to have an exclusive interview with him shortly. Stay with CNN.
We have a very special guest with us, Miles, at this moment. Well, not exactly with us, around us. President of the United States, Bill Clinton, is over at the Vehicle Assembly Building, right over here, a couple hundred yards away from us. And we have the privilege of saying good morning to him, welcoming him on behalf of CNN, at any rate, to Cape Canaveral and this launch. Good to see you, Mr. President.
Good morning, Walter, and good morning, Miles, or good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here.
They say, Mr. President, that there are more visitors here than at any time since the moon launchings, the moon flights, and that includes the President of the United States. What's particularly appealing to you about this flight?
Well, of course, there's the John Glenn factor. Senator Glenn is a very good personal friend of Hillary's and mine, as well as an ally, a colleague, and like all Americans, I'm thrilled that he's going up today. But also, you know, this really is the last launch before we begin to put the International Space Station up. So John Glenn began this first phase of our space program, and he's ending it just before we start on the space station. So it's very exciting. It's important for the space program, but it's a great day for America, a great day for our senior citizens, and I hope that all Americans share the exuberance that I feel today.
You know, some naysayers say, Mr. President, that this flight of Glenn's is your reward to him for his stalwart support of yours during his years in the Senate. Anything to that?
No. I've always wanted John to be able to go back, as long as I've known he's wanted to. But if I'd had my druthers, he'd be home in Ohio running for re-election right now. And yeah. He said he was too old to serve another term in the Senate, but he wasn't too old to go into space. And right. I think the American people should know that the decision to send him was made strictly by the book. I had no role in it. He had to pass the strenuous physical exams, and then for each experiment he's going through, he had to prove that he was qualified and able to do that. I think this is very important. You know, one of the most important benefits that the American people derive from our space program is the whole rush of discoveries we get that help us here on Earth. Environmental discoveries, healthcare discoveries of all kinds. We've got all kinds of medical scanning equipment today that we wouldn't have but for the space program. We've got protective clothing that people who are super sensitive to the sun can wear that we wouldn't have but for the space program. So we're going to get a lot out of John Glenn going up there today, and I think the country is well served by doing it, and goodness knows for a lifetime of service to us in the air and on the ground, he's earned this chance.
You know, they say that President Kennedy grounded Glenn after his first flight because he didn't want to risk the death of a hero out there in a second flight. Would you have made that decision?
Well, I don't know. I can't say because I wasn't there then, and it's easy to second guess. But I'll say this. I think that John Glenn going up today is a very good thing for America. We're going to learn a lot from it, and we're all going to, I think, be thrilled by it. And I'm just glad he was brave enough to do it.
You know, out there on pad 39A, Mr. President, there to the right, to the south of the 39B, from which this flight would take place, there's a shuttle scheduled to take into orbit in just a few months the first parts of the planned American-Russian Joint International Space Station, almost a small city permanently in space. Well, now that Russia has this desperate economic situation that endangered that schedule, it looks like we may have to put in a lot of money to try to keep that space station on schedule, yes, the construction of it. Are we prepared to do that?
Well, Walter, if it were required, I would be supportive of it, and I would be happy to talk to the congressional leaders in both parties. You know, our space program has been a great investment. It's had hardly any increase in funding since I became president. But we've gone from 2 launches to 8 launches a year. We've dramatically cut costs. NASA is the sort of the star, the poster child of Vice President Gore's Reinventing Government campaign, and we're getting a lot out of it. If we were required now to help the Russians during this difficult period, which will not last forever, so that they could continue to participate, I would be in favor of that. I think that it's very important that we have the Europeans, the Japanese, the Canadians, and the Russians in the space station venture. I've been here, I've been over the space station project many times in great detail in Houston. I've been twice, I've been down there to look at that, and I think we're doing the right thing with this space station, and we need to stay with it.
Mr. President, it's Miles O'Brien. I have a question for you, but first I want to check the countdown clock for our viewers for just a moment. We have now entered into a hold, a 10-minute hold. We are at T-minus 20 minutes and holding. The hold began at 1:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It will end at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then we'll count down again to 9 minutes, another 10-minute hold at that point. Once again, to remind our viewers, this is simply a way of NASA keeping up with the important business at hand and making sure everybody's doing their job on time. Mr. President, I'm just curious, are you nervous?
Oh, a little bit. I think that it's part of the excitement. I'm a little nervous, but I've got great confidence in these people. I've had a lot of great honors as president to meet people who serve our country, but meeting the people who are in the space program, the astronauts, those who work on the ground, those who plan these missions, they've done everything they can possibly do, and they would never compromise an iota of safety or reliability just because Hillary and I and all the rest of the world are here through the media. I feel good about this, but yes, I'm nervous and I'm excited. I feel like a kid at his first Christmas. I'm very excited about this.
Mr. President, President Bush in 1989 proclaimed the national goal to send humans to the planet Mars by the year 2019. That's the 50th anniversary of Neil Armstrong's first step onto the moon. Do you affirm that goal for the Mars mission?
Well, let me say, what we're doing now will help us once we get to the position of evaluating that. I don't want to either affirm or renounce it. What I think we should do is to recognize that what we have now is a set of very focused goals in our space program. We are working on the space station. We are working on the shuttle. We are working on space transportation. We are working on things that tell us about our environment on Earth. And then we're doing these special projects, the Hubble telescope, which is magnificent. And we did the Mars Pathfinder mission on, you remember, July the 4th of last year. And so we're going to see how we are. Let's get the space station up and going and evaluate what our long-term prospects are. I'll tell you this, I am for the continued aggressive exploration of space in ways that are high quality, cost effective, and that will benefit us here on Earth. And I hope that we can have, as a result of this flight today, even more broad-based American support from all Americans of all parties and all walks of life for our mission in space. It's still very, very important.
Mr. President, as a journalist, I think time if I didn't ask you what your advisors are telling you about the results of next Tuesday's election.
The truth is, they don't know. We've got an extraordinary number of very, very close elections. In this 2-year period, the members of the other party raised, I think, $100 million more than our folks did. But we've got good candidates and an extremely good grassroots effort. I think a good agenda. The only thing I think I should say today, to avoid being too political, is that it's a very important election. And I would hope that every American who is eligible to vote would go and vote in that election. If you look at this space launch today, this is a triumph of American democracy. It was made possible by the elected representatives of the American people supporting the space program. And it is just one more example of why it's so important for citizens to stand up and be counted on Election Day. So if you feel patriotic when you see John Glenn and the others go up in space today, then keep that patriotic feeling till next Tuesday and go and vote for the candidate and the programs and the issues of your choice.
All right. Mr. President, thank you so much for being with us on CNN today. And we hope you enjoyed the launch.
Thank you. I will. I think I ought to say just one other thing because I'm talking to CNN. I know that I speak for a lot of people when I express my thanks to the late John Holloman for the work he did to advance our cause in space. And I know that all of you will be thinking about him and his family today. And I thank CNN for giving such a high profile to our space mission. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those words. Miles and I were going to dedicate this broadcast at an appropriate time to the memory of John Holloman, who was a space expert at CNN, was as skilled as Miles, planned to be in this anchor chair, and who was killed, unfortunately, in an automobile accident just a couple of weeks ago. This broadcast is dedicated to the memory of John Holloman.
All right, it's time for us to take a break. When we return, we'll check in and see how the crowds are doing along the beaches. CNN's Mark Potter there, Goodyear blimp hovering overhead. With the clock holding at 20 minutes, stay with us. Welcome back live. The Kennedy Space Center, the place, perhaps a place where history will be made in just a short while, a little more than a half hour. That clock reads 20 minutes and holding, T-minus 20 minutes and holding to be specific. We're in the middle of a 10-minute planned hold that is part of NASA's routine here as they tidy up business, make sure everybody is set to go on to the next level, which will begin at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. They will count the clock down to 9 minutes and engage in another 10-minute hold. Once again, all this is about safety. All this is about making sure everybody's doing their job right. All this is about making sure we have a safe flight today. Nothing on the horizon whatsoever which would indicate the shuttle will not launch on time at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The crowds are big all along Florida Space Coast, all along the beaches and the causeways. Several 100,000 people reported in attendance, camping out, barbecuing, enjoying what they hope will be a historic occasion, John Glenn's second ride into space. CNN's Mark Potter is among them. Mark?
Well, Miles, the crowds are definitely growing, and people are standing by, in fact, standing up. It appears that
I'll do the blimp after.
They're all very excited to see the shuttle, and they know it's coming. It's about a half hour away, and so everyone knows that, and they're getting ready for it. Now, we have been told by tourism officials that the estimates of about 300,000 people coming here have been met. They think that it's truly been that many people that have made it this way now. And the bridges, the roads, the beaches from Patrick Air Force Base north to the shuttle area and then beyond are jammed with people now. In fact, the Sheriff's Department tells us that the Max Brewer Causeway that connects Titusville and the Kennedy Space Center has been closed down because it's just jammed with traffic. There are so many cars there, they can't go anywhere, and that's where the people are going to watch the liftoff. Whether they wanted to or not, they're stuck, and it's actually not a bad viewing spot. It's pretty close. Some of the traffic has been backed up for 5 miles, we've been told, But overall, the Sheriff's Department says that everything has been going well. There have been no major problems, no major injuries, and everything is going well. And everyone is now just waiting for the launch. Miles, back to you.
Can't do you yet. All right. All right, thank you very much, Mark Potter. Enjoying the scene from the group on the causeway and the beaches. The clock has started up once again, and we will continue counting down from 19 minutes and 24 seconds on down to 9 minutes, and then we'll have another 10-minute hold. Once again, all part of the routine here. Let's move along to Ohio. You know, Ohio, for some reason, is the home to more astronauts than any other state. The Buckeye State has 23 astronauts, present and former. Jeff Flock is in New Concord, where John Glenn was born and has spent most of his life. Jeff?
That's right, Miles. We still haven't figured out exactly why there are more astronauts here from Ohio, but we know it's true. We're at Muskingum College. It's a small college out here in New Concord, Ohio. And if you go down to the floor, we're up here with a couple of special guests who have spent some special times with John Glenn over the years. But first, I want to take you down to the floor and show you the big screen televisions that have been set up. It's reminiscent of 36 years ago. It was the college gymnasium back then, too, where all the press and all of the townsfolk gathered to watch their hero reach for the stars. And they are here again. The old gymnasium where that took place is actually now named for John Glenn. And I'm with one man who was the best man at his wedding and another man who played football with him here at Muskingum. And Lloyd White, I guess I have to ask you, what's going through your mind and what's different about this one than the one 36 years ago?
Well, I think, as John said, the technology is so much improved now. I guess I'm not as nervous as I was 36 years ago.
He's got a pretty good chance of coming back this time.
Oh, I think so, yeah. I think so. I'm not too worried about that part of it.
Yeah. We've got a picture, by the way, of that wedding day. You said you almost don't remember that. That was quite a while ago.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I didn't know there was any pictures ever taken of it. But I do have a clipping that told who was there, so yeah, that was a great day. He was in service at that time and came back from service and in his uniform, and I was his best man. There was another student, another guy who had been in school there. But I don't know who it was.
I'm going to move to Harold Kaiser now, who played football here at Muskingum with him. Harold, did you ever have any indication when you were playing football together back then where John would wind up?
No indication of where he'd wind up, but we knew he had some real basic skills. He was a good player. He played center on the team, and he hit hard. He had certain goals that he wanted to accomplish. He was committed to accomplish his goals. He was a good guy, good sportsman.
You know, we've got a camera outside. It's out at the old gym, which is back then not named for him, but it is now. And they're going to plant a time capsule out there to kind of mark this momentous occasion. Now, Lloyd, about John going up now at his age. Some people have criticized it and said, oh, it's just a reward for past service and all that sort of thing.
Well, he's serious about this. Of course, he's been chairman of the aging committee for the Senate, you know.
Makes sense to you.
Yeah, and he's worked a long time on this subject.
Lloyd, Harold, I appreciate it very much. Thank you so much. We're going to leave you with a shot of this place. I guess it explains, Miles and Walter, as well as anything can, why John Glenn is who he is. It's out in this small town, out in this country, this beautiful country of Ohio. It's where he came from, and he'll never be farther away from New Concord than he will be today. But in some ways, I guess he takes a little bit of it with him. That's the latest from here, folks. Back to you.
All right, Jeff Flock in a beautiful New Concord, Ohio. Look at those fall colors there. A beautiful day there, just as it is a beautiful day here. We have a couple of special guests joining Walter and me. First of all, sitting immediately to my right, Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, who has been sitting here watching the countdown go down. And from Sacramento...
I think I recognize him anywhere.
And
Can't miss seeing you, Walter.
And from Sacramento, California, Chuck Yeager, the man who first broke the sound barrier in an aircraft. Chuck, first of all, what are you thinking about this flight? Good idea?
Yeah, it's a pretty good deal. You know, NASA sorely needs some publicity, and they couldn't have picked a better guy than John Glenn, who did such a tremendous job back in 1962. And I'm watching with a great deal of anticipation. And talking to Walter Cronkite, man, I get the feeling this is an old man's show, with the exception of the young six that are hauling John up into space and talking to Walter, who's been around for a long time, and myself. Last time I saw Walter, we were on the ramp at Edwards looking at a bunch of old airplanes, if you remember, Walter.
Never forget that, Chuck. And as a matter of fact, I wonder, are you a little more comfortable today with this form of rocketry? You and I, after my talking to you, I became convinced that we should have been working on returnable aircraft from the very beginning, rather than go for the disposable booster.
Yeah, basically, like you got Buzz there beside you, he sort of served as a commandant of the Aerospace Research Pilot School. The Air Force was very much in space with the MOLD, Manned Orbital Laboratory, and the X-20 Dinosaur, which was a reusable space vehicle, but they sort of changed things in 1966 and made space for peaceful purposes, and we sort of backed out of the space program, and consequently, NASA has done a very good job, with the exception. I just sort of get the feeling that it would have been better to put a young astronaut in that seat that John is sitting in so that we could use him for the next 15 years.
Yeah, well, when you took X-1 up there and broke the sound barrier, we thought maybe you'd go right on up to the stars.
Well, I wasn't qualified to be a NASA astronaut since I only had a high school education, but it was fun flying airplanes.
You bet. Well, you did a great job of it, too, Chuck.
Thank you very much, Walter.
You bet.
Chuck, let me ask you one question. I know in the early days of the program, test pilots such as yourself often had disparaging remarks for astronauts. They felt the old spam in the can analogy applied. I assume you think differently these days. Is that true?
No, basically the shuttle is an airplane, and the guys who fly it like an airplane and land it like an airplane. Originally, with the stuff that Buzz flew in the original 7 astronauts, they had very little control over where the vehicle landed because they had a very low L over D. And consequently, I was an airplane guy and didn't hold an awful lot of interest in the capsule return. The shuttle's a different vehicle because it flies like an airplane.
Go ahead.
I'm afraid if we had stuck with airplanes, the Russians might have beat us to the moon. I think we needed capsules. We needed the simplest way to get up and then provide the maneuverability on orbit and as much control of the landing site as possible. It certainly is a viable way to put things into orbit with airplanes, as we're seeing with the shuttle. I'm very much in favor of booster rockets, first stage rockets, coming back and landing like an airplane, but being launched vertically.
Yeah,
well, I wonder. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, basically, Buzz, if you recall, the X-20 was a very similar vehicle to the shuttle itself, and but we'll never know, so it's all speculation.
Well, I guess I suppose in a perfect world you could have had both programs going simultaneously, but money was as scarce as it always is.
Perfect, and even richer world.
Exactly.
Well, when an airplane has to carry all the fuel along with it, it gets to be quite large. When it's just being boosted, as the shuttle is just being boosted, and the X-20 was just going to be boosted, you have to do something to contain all that rocket fuel that's going to get it going up there, and you'd like to recover that part, and that means a recoverable booster.
Yeah.
Chuck, I want to ask you, you said at the outset that you feel that NASA needs the publicity, and this is a good publicity, well, stunt perhaps. NASA continues to insist this is about science. Do you believe them?
Yeah, well, I don't believe it's as important as you would be led to believe, basically because one 7-day orbit by one old guy, like we all are old, in my opinion, won't give you very valid data, and that's the way I feel about it.
Would you like to go if you had the opportunity?
No, it'd be a waste of money. I'd rather see the young guys, of which there's more than 100 sitting down in Houston, eager to get into space, and we could use them for the next 15 years as active astronauts, and that's just the way I feel about it.
Well, you know, Chuck, they say that one man a database doesn't make. In the case of John Glenn, one man's experience at the age of 77 up there won't do it. You're a young kid of 75 right now. Why don't we have a succession of flights, and all of us at this advanced age will go one by one, and we'll get a good database for it.
Walter, if I remember a few years ago, you were sort of slated to go up in the shuttle, and I agree. You know, quantity makes a good quality.
I think we're building a crew here today. Cronkite, Buffett, Yeager, and Aldrin. Yeah.
No, I agree with Walter. I think one of the most necessary things we need right now is a journalist in space.
Yeah.
I'd like to see people explain to the public why individuals would want to go into space in a very professional way, a way that the public can relate to and can understand, and not a biased point of view of someone whose profession it is to be in space. But we want to know why a journalist would take the risk. After all, you get paid a lot just by staying on the ground. It's not paid, I'm sure of that. But even more important than that, I think, is to relate the desire to be in space. Why do you take the risk? Because we're laying the groundwork for the next generation space shuttle, which is going to carry a good number of people into space. Not just the number that NASA needs, but the number that are needed economically for a tourism industry.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in for 1 minute. I got to tell you, excuse me, Chuck, I got to jump in here for 1 minute. The words "Godspeed, John Glenn" were etched in all of our memories. Anybody who's ever seen that launch, the words uttered by Scott Carpenter. As we look at the clock as it counts down toward the launch of Discovery, Scott Carpenter is here at the Kennedy Space Center, and he will be uttering similar greetings to the orbiter. However, they won't be able to hear it. They'll hear it later. It'll be sent up via satellite to the orbiter after it attains its orbit this afternoon. And let's listen in to that.
For the crew aboard Discovery.
Yes, at this point in the count, it seems appropriate to say to the Shuttle Discovery crew, good luck, have a safe flight, and to say once again, Godspeed, John Glenn.
Carpenter served as Glenn's backup for the Mercury
Those are words etched in all our memories. Godspeed, John
Yeah.
Glenn. It said it all then, and Scott Carpenter embellishing upon it today. It kind of gives you goosebumps at that moment, doesn't it?
What are you up to these days, Buzz? I see you more than almost any of the other astronauts. We meet in the strangest places. Rhodes, for one place.
Island, yes.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Well, I was in the process of writing a book over there when we met maybe 10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
I've written another science fiction story since then. That's being made into a television movie. I'm working on another space thriller. But in addition to that, the more pertinent things, I'm working with an organization with reusable first-stage rockets. We take a rocket that already exists, like an Atlas, and we put an airplane around it so that after it does its job of lifting the upper stages, it comes back and flies like an airplane back to land.
How
I've introduced this idea.
One of the Peenemünde boys, one of the German Peenemünde scientists, Kraft Ericke,
Yes.
who worked for Convair, built the Atlas. He had this plan of getting the Atlas actually launched and then taking those empty tanks and building a space station of those. It made a lot of sense.
Well, that's going to make sense in the future as I see it too, Walter.
All right, for now, it's Grist for Science Fiction. We do have to take a break right now. We want to thank General Yeager, who is still with us on the line from Sacramento. Godspeed, Chuck Yeager. We appreciate you being with us here on CNN today.
Thanks, and good luck.
All right, take care.
Take care, Chuck.
All right, we're going to take a break.
To you, Chuck.
The countdown here continues. CNN's live coverage continues. We are now about 17 minutes away from the expected liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, the clock holding at 9 minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to our continuing and extensive coverage of the launch of STS-95, the launch of Discovery, the return of John Glenn to space. You're looking at live pictures taken from the Goodyear blimp and some of the causeways, docks, and beaches where hundreds of thousands of people are expected to witness this launch now, about 14.5 minutes away. This has been a controversial mission all along. A lot of people have said it's a part PR stunt, maybe it's a political payoff. that it has really little to do with science. Among those critics, a former NASA historian, Alex Rowland, who now is in academia. He joins us from Duque University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Alex, is it a stunt?
Well, it's not quite a stunt. That is, I think it's a trip that Senator Glenn has wanted for years, and he finally prevailed upon NASA to let him fly. And I think most of us, even the critics of the flight, think that it's a reasonable thing to do. Glenn has had a very distinguished career. He never got his chance for his second flight, and I think we'd all applaud it if he would just go up, and we'd all recognize it as a nostalgia trip, which we're all having, I think. The problem arises when you represent it as science, because it's clearly not science.
What about the risks involved, Alex? Do you think it's too risky putting someone of this age on a space shuttle where a situation might occur where they'd have to rapidly exit?
Well, I think there is a slightly elevated risk if you have someone, first of all, who hasn't trained as much as the other astronauts, and also, you know, just isn't as young and isn't in their physical condition. Though Senator Glenn is a remarkable physical specimen for somebody 77 years old. So I think there's a slightly elevated risk, but I don't think it's terribly significant.
Dr. Rowland, you're critical to a degree of the raison d'etre, at any rate, for this flight.
Right.
But you're also in the history department at Duke University. And looking at space so far and its position in our economic priorities, these flights cost around $500 million apiece. They average around $450 to $500 million. That would build an awfully lot of schools. I meant to ask this to the president. We ran out of time. But is it in your mind, a history professor, is it worth it?
I don't think so. Clearly, after we've developed this capability to send people into space, we want to sustain it and maintain it. I'm not sure we have to do as many flights as we do, and in fact, that number of 450 or 500 million is NASA's number. I think a much more realistic estimate is $1 billion. Some people have even estimate $1.5 billion for each flight if you include development costs. That's a lot of money to send people up when they really don't have very much to do in space. If you look at it historically, the phenomenon is that the great promise that we all experienced in the 1960s, that these brave astronauts were going to go up and pioneer a new frontier for us, has been disappointing. In fact, we've learned that it costs more than we expected, it's more difficult, it's more dangerous, and the payoff from having people in space is far less than we'd anticipated. So I'm not sure it really is a very good bargain.
Former NASA historian Alex Rowland, thanks for being with us as we anticipate the launch of the Space Shuttle Discovery, a launch which he, among others, is harshly critical of. We are going to take a break with the countdown clock now still holding at T-minus 9 minutes. Should resume in just a couple of minutes. Stay with us for more continuing coverage of the return to space for John Glenn.
Have you done that rundown?
You're looking at a live picture from the Kennedy Space Center, the Space Shuttle Discovery, and the first potential glitch of the day apparently has just occurred. NASA reporting some sort of master alarm situation which may cause them to extend the built-in hold which they're in at this moment. Let's go to CNN's John Zarella with details. John?
That's right, Miles. NASA is saying they will extend the hold. They do not expect it to be a long hold, but it will be extended because of a master alarm that went off in the crew cabin, the vent system. This all is part of the procedure that we talked about why they stay in these holds so they can run through their final last-minute checks. And during these last-minute checks, a master alarm went off, so now they're running through the system again. It's a cabin vent alarm. They do not believe it's serious. It may just be a sensor anomaly, but they're going to run through the system again, check it out before they pick up the countdown. That's where we stand right now. Miles?
All right, I'm listening a little bit to NASA TV right now as you speak, John Zarella, and of course this vent check is very, very critical as the spaceship ascends toward orbit. I had heard earlier, I thought, that everything checked out when they closed the hatch. What has changed since?
Well, apparently they had at least one alarm go off, and then there were some test conductors saying that perhaps a second alarm had gone off. They did not believe it was a serious situation, but they wanted to take the time now to go back and make sure to check it out to make sure that this is not a serious problem so they can pick up the count. And again, they have emphasized they do believe that the hold will be extended, but only for a short period of time, indicating they think that it's probably just a sensor and they can work through this. Miles?
John, just in your dealings with NASA, did you get a sense of the urgency of the problem? If you had to put it on a 1 to 10 scale, what would you give it right now?
It sounds at this point as if it's just one of those. It's probably around a 3. They don't think it's anything very, very significant. They'll get by. But they're always like that. You don't ever get the sense from NASA in all the years I've been covering it that you have a real serious problem until they get to the source of the problem, and then they find out exactly what they're dealing with. Right now, they don't think it is, Miles.
Thank you, John Sorrell. Stand by. Please let us know if you have any more information. Dave Wolf has just been on the phone with the Launch Control Center. Dave, what do you hear?
Right, our integration and test team tells us that the master alarm went off at the time that the probe, the pressure check cap was pulled off. The set points are very close. It may have just tapped the set point. The exact data is being evaluated with Kurt Brown, the commander, right now. Likely this is just a close set point, not an indication of a problem. We'll know shortly.
All right, but help us understand this for the layperson. They're pulling a plug on the hatch, and there's a pressure drop when they do that. Is that correct?
Right. There's a momentary drop in pressure as the plug is pulled and the cap is replaced. The system is set to detect the pressure inside the cabin. When it drops just slightly, it may have just bumped underneath that set point for the alarm system. This may be exactly what was supposed to happen in the situation, given that we had a slight dip in pressure as the cap was replaced.
It sounds like it would be an easy problem to troubleshoot. Is that correct?
It sounds that way at this point. We're going to have to let the launch control team do their thorough analysis. Hopefully it won't take long, though.
All right. Dave Wolf, Walter Cronkite standing by here. We will keep you posted, of course, as this continues. Once again, John Zarellis giving it a 3 on the scale. Dave, would you agree with that?
Or less likely when we hear the real reason. Now, this may have been due to vent valves changing position in the cabin. They cycle vent valves at this point in time. We have to talk with Kurt Brown with exactly what was going on in the cockpit, compare it to the Launch Control Center data, and look at if this was an expected result or not.
All right. Once again, a reminder of how complex this spacecraft is. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more continuing coverage of the launch of the Space Shuttle Discovery in just a moment.
Today on CNN, it's your chance to talk back to Miles O'Brien and Walter Cronkite moments after John Glenn's historic return to space. Today, 3 Eastern.
Welcome back to the Kennedy Space Center. Live pictures. The hold continues. 9 minutes and holding as they work one problem, which we are told is a minor problem with a detector which indicated some pressure gradient inside the space shuttle. That problem remains unresolved as best we know. They are now polling all of the people in the trenches at the Launch Control Center. Let's listen in as they do that.
Sir, go. Cape weather. Roger, sir. We have no constraints to launch. Over. Ops manager. AMMT is go for launch. See engineering one more time. Engineering Director 212. Go, no go. Yeah, we are still completing our pull. Attention all stations, this entity on 212. We will be resuming the count momentarily. Stand by.
We've remained in the built-in hold an additional 8.5 minutes so far.
So, I've completed my poll. We are go. All right, thank you. We'll wait for the equals call. CDR Launch Director. Go ahead, Launch Director. Kurt, the launch team is go. Your vehicle's ready. The weather's beautiful out there. On behalf of the entire launch team, you and the crew at Discovery have a great mission. Thank you very much, sir, and Discovery's crew is definitely ready to go, and we would like you to proceed. NTD, pick up the count. I copy that, Launch Director. And CISL, NTD? CISL? Up to recorder activation complete? Not yet. Okay, and the no constraint is picking up the hold at 9, is that correct? Negative. Copy that. And attention all stations. Countdown clock will resume momentarily. GLS NTD, pick up the count on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
Now we're now at T-minus 9 minutes and counting. We heard NASA Test Director Doug Lyons conduct a poll of the launch team. Also Ralph Rowe, launch director, conducting a poll of his team. And Don McMonagle also giving the input from the mission management team, also located here in the firing room. All systems are go for the launch of the Shuttle Discovery.
Voice of launch control here. Dave Wolf has been on the phone working on this apparent problem, apparently a minor problem. Dave, what have you heard about apparently it's been resolved. Tell us what happened.
Yes, apparently it has been. It's the environmental control system person in the control center's final call. It's as we said, about an hour ago when the closeout crew took that pressurization check probe out to put the cap on, there was a slight dip in cabin pressure. The monitors that are supposed to detect that pressure and tell us if there's a leak got tripped. It's an expected situation. It sounds like, at the current information we have, and since the count is going, I think this was the system working normally to tell us that we were losing a little pressure.
All right. Let's, now that we've resolved the one glitch of the afternoon, let's give viewers an idea of what they're about to see. We had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to sit down with Commander Kurt Brown, and I had him give us a sort of blow-by-blow account of what happens on the ride into orbit.
The way I describe that is, you're sitting at the stoplight, and somebody runs in the back of you, and it gives you a big jolt, and you're on your way. So that's pretty much liftoff.
A little whiplash.
A little whiplash. Obviously, we're in the seats and we have all the headrests, but it's definitely a kick in the back when you lift off. The vehicle very quickly accelerates right up to 2 Gs, 2+ Gs, and we're on our way. We don't really feel the roll program. We see it more than feel it. We again just continue to accelerate. The vehicle has about 7 million pounds of thrust. It only weighs about 4 million pounds, so it's quickly accelerating. Approaching the 2-minute point. The boosters are separated about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. And approaching 2-minute point, the boosters start losing their propulsion. We start slowing down. The acceleration bleeds off to about 1 G, basically what we're seeing on the pad with. And then we have a big flash in the window, and the boosters are gone. They're separated. And then we're basically just on the shuttle main engines feeding the fuel out of the big tank. And then we start a slow climb up the hill. We start accelerating again. The G level starts building up as we burn down fuel out of the big tank, and that happens up to about 7 minutes, a little over 7 minutes into a flight. The G continues to build. At that point, about 7:30 or so, we're up to 3 Gs now. We've increased our acceleration up to 3 Gs. The shuttle main engines start throttling back now to hold that 3 G schedule because we don't want to go over 3 Gs. And we hold that 3 G profile all the way up to 8 minutes and 30 seconds into the flight, at which time the main engines are commanded to shut down. And we go from 3 Gs, impressive 3 Gs, because by that time you're really happy to get rid of that 3 Gs. But it goes from 3 Gs to 0 G in about a half a second. And it's quite impressive, quite an experience.
I find that hard to do.
We're back live now. We're back live, and that is the gantry, if you want to call it that, the white room that has been retracted from the Space Shuttle Discovery. We're now in the 5-minute range on the countdown. Difficult for me to see the clock where I am right now. The Space Shuttle Discovery, apparently everything all set and ready as far as we can hear. Let's listen into mission control, the voice of Lisa Malone, and the communications between the commander and the controllers.
Correct. The countdown clock will hold at T-minus 5 minutes due to NTD hold request.
All right,
There's a 10-minute hold coming up, isn't it? 9 minutes?
Well, we're past that now, but we're about to have a 5-minute hold, and we're going to try to figure out what that is all about. Apparently, we have a report of some aircraft in the area, and that obviously is an important issue.
T-minus 5 minutes and holding.
Let's listen to Lisa Malone.
The countdown clock is holding at T-minus 5 minutes.
Again, the range safety officer monitoring the airspace within the Kennedy Space Center vicinity reported an aircraft in the area.
Well, the range.
Well, we've had aircraft in the area, we've had ships in the area, but this isn't new.
Let's go to John Zarella, who has some more for us.
Miles, what they're saying is they have an aircraft in the area, they can't find it, so they are holding the count at T-minus 5 until they find out where that aircraft is or was, or if indeed it is in the airspace. That's where we stand. That's why they're holding. Range safety.
Well, all right, I gotta ask a stupid question. If they can't find it, how do they know it's here?
Well, we're lucky it happened now.
Apparently the flight path that it was on was taking it near here, and now it was supposed to have cleared the area in plenty of time, but it
Launch
hasn't.
team here will stand by.
Maybe the microphone picked up the buzzing in my ear.
Maybe so. Maybe so. How often does this happen? We're joined also, we should tell our viewers, by Bernard Harris, also a shuttle veteran, a man who's done spacewalks and who's now firmly grounded right beside us here. Bernard, how often do range safety considerations involve aircraft?
Well, most of the time it does, because, you know, they're scouring the skies above the whole area to keep people out. They're also doing the same thing on the surface of the water to keep ships out. And so it's the job of the range safety officer to make sure that nobody gets into that precious airspace that we're flying in.
They've got to worry about ships in the water, of course, out there, because they're going to dump those external tanks. Are going to come down when they come down pretty late. Not in this area, but the booster motors do. They're going to be coming down. If they're parachuted down, but they come in pretty hard.
That's true. That's true. They have parachutes and land about 20 miles or so out, so we want to make sure we keep that cleared. It kind of be startling to be in your boat and have this thing land on top of you.
Startling is a nice way of putting it. Dave, well, let me ask you this. Do you know what the sanitized no-fly zone is for shuttle launch?
Actually, I don't know the exact boundaries, but we had a range safety hold on my first flight. In fact, a cancellation due to a range safety issue.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so this happens now and then.
Yeah. Well, there's another consideration, too, and that's a return to Kennedy Space Center abort. If they have to abort, they have to make a landing right back in here. They don't want a lot of aircraft in the area, or any aircraft in the area.
This is a vehicle which can't tolerate a holding pattern very well, can it? It's a dead stick landing with one try and one try alone, right, Bernard?
That's right. There's no holding at all, in fact. You have to come down and put it down the first time every time.
We're looking at pictures, I believe, of the offending aircraft up there. I think we saw it. Maybe not. We're not certain. It's an aircraft anyway. It could be the one. It may not be. Apparently, NASA can't find it right now. We continue in our hold at 5 minutes. This is, let's see if we can listen in to NASA for a moment.
You know,
please keep me advised.
any hold is a little worrisome because, as always, it seems, you know, when things start going badly, they compound. And the whole, things happen. Things have gotten all keyed up to go, and then something breaks or something over.
And, you know, these folks have been on their backs now for 2.5 hours or so, and this is probably one of the more stressful, painful parts of the mission, is laying on your back with all this heavy gear. They'll be more comfortable as soon as the engine's cut off and they're in space. Their weight comes off and they're floating.
Yeah, they're not exactly Barco loungers, are they, Bernard?
No, not at all. I remember my first flight laying there for about 2.5 hours, and you begin to wonder about those natural functions that normally come into play here. And upon liftoff, though, that all goes away.
That's right.
Yeah.
Of course, the first thing we activate is the WCS, Waste Collection System, when we get on orbit.
Well, comfortable or not, I've heard that one of the serious problems out there is staying awake when you're lying there on your back that long.
Well, you know, I haven't told this publicly, but on my second flight, things were going so well, and we were so comfortable in the hold that I actually dozed for a little bit until we came in the 9-minute hole and was shocked. We're going, and where I was.
As if to prove you have the right stuff. There's
You
Daniel
got
Golden, the NASA administrator, who is over near the Launch Control Center, or perhaps near the shuttle landing facility. It looks like he's on top of the LCC. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, and that was Bob Cabana, commander of our first space station launch in 5 weeks.
Yes, and his role today is what?
I can't tell you exactly.
All right.
We got 2/3 or 1/3 of our astronaut office here supporting this mission.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, Bernard Harris, we don't want you to fall asleep now. I'm curious, does the anxiety level go up on board the ship, or is this just like another sim?
Well, you know, we train many aspects of this, all phases. Nowhere can you get the entire training. So you do it in phases, and they have been through this. About 3 weeks ago, they came down here for dry count for those guys who are neophytes and new to the business. And that makes you feel very comfortable about the machine that you're about to fly in.
Did you feel comfortable, Dave?
Absolutely comfortable. The training and knowing the people, the talent here, felt good about it.
There are crowds all over the place waiting to see this particular launch. Hundreds of thousands expected along the Space Coast. There are some of them right there, training binoculars to the sky, wondering if they can see anything, perhaps listening on the radio, understanding the hold, perhaps not, wondering why it hasn't launched at this moment.
Miles, why don't we take those models and put them up here and show what's going to happen in the launch profile immediately after the engines start. If the countdown is picked up, we'll just drop this.
Sure, go right ahead, Walter.
Won't drop it because we don't want to break it. but it goes about like this. The at T minus 10 seconds, the command go for main engine start. And then T minus 6 seconds, these 3 main engines here at the base, or the rear of the orbital spacecraft, they ignite. Now they've got to reach 90% of their thrust by T minus 2, or there's an automatic shutdown. At T0, that's the launch time, the solid rocket boosters here on the side, they ignite. That's when the whole thing looks like it's going up. Onboard computers command hold down bolts there to be blown, and that launches the thing into beginning its mission. And at that point, there's no turning back.
140 million horsepower.
Yes.
It's hard to turn it around.
Yeah, 7 million pounds of thrust. My God, that's a big firecracker. Now, as we see it goes up, we've seen these pictures many times. We're going to see it again today. That 7 seconds after launch, the shuttle will have cleared the tower out there, which we don't see here, which surrounds it now. It would clear the tower. The roll begins. The machine begins to roll over, so that the spacecraft, the orbiter, is on the bottom and upside down. That's the roll and yaw. And that gives the crew a chance to see the horizon, to orient themselves in flight, which they couldn't do otherwise. Now, at that point, the control of the mission is lost from here and goes to Houston until the landing back here. Now, 30 seconds later, they've throttled back the engines. Up to then, they've gone up to practically full power. But the spacecraft is built to tolerate 3G, three times gravity, 3 times its weight. And with full power, at that point, still in the atmosphere, they'd be getting more G-force than that and blow this thing apart. So they throttle back until they get through that atmosphere that is causing this buffeting at that point, and then they power up again, and they're on their way to space. At T plus 60 seconds, 1 minute after they're up there, the shuttle's at around 33,000 feet, I think, right, Dave? More than 6 miles up anyway, and that's when the main engines are throttled up to 104% of their power. 2 minutes, then another minute after that, the shuttle is 30 miles high, traveling at 2,890 miles per hour, it says here. I can't remember all these numbers.
That's right.
That's when the solid rocket boosters are jettisoned. That's T plus 2 minutes. They're jettisoned, they parachute down after 17,000 feet, are recovered and rebuilt for future missions. At T30, 2.5 minutes up there, they go for transatlantic abort. That would mean that they no longer have to worry about their very difficult maneuvers turning around trying to get back to the Space Center here to land, but can land in Africa or in Spain.
If they lose an engine. If they lose an engine, they can still make it across at that point, exactly.
Right. And that's about the story. Very shortly thereafter, the main engines are throttled down a little more, that's early on. At what time do they go into orbit, actually? At 17,500 miles an hour, 8 minutes plus, T plus 8, right?
Yeah, 8 minutes, 30 seconds.
I believe it was 8:30.
We have some news from John Zarella, who's down on the ground there. John, go ahead.
Miles, what we heard was that range safety reported that there were multiple contacts, that the radar was saturated within the box, which is a 10-mile by 30-mile wide box, and we seem to have seen actually what looked like skyriders in the distance. A couple of FAA aircraft have been sent up to chase them off, and I believe now they gave the clear, all clear, and in fact, the clock is ticking again. Miles?
Your timing's impeccable, John Zarella. As you stood there, the clock began ticking down once again, and gentlemen, we should not expect another pause at this point unless there is another problem, correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Go all the way down.
What's going on right now, Dave?
It's time to start the auxiliary power units. This is what burns hydrazine. 3 of them provides the hydraulic pressure for the aero surfaces, the ailerons, if you will, and to gimbal the engines. That's pointing the engines in the right direction. Very critical. these engines will be gimbaled and tested over the next minutes.
They'll presumably advise us at T-minus 2 minutes that they're able to scrub that 31-second hold that they've built in there.
That's right. We'll expect an error to occur. There was a minor problem with a sensor determined weeks ago. It wasn't worth fixing, but it's going to cause a master alarm when the engine's gimbal, and the data will be checked by the people in the Launch Control Center. Since the data has failed, they need to clear that failure flag, if you will, by 31 seconds in order to prevent the automatic launch sequencer from initiating automatically a hold at 31 seconds. So we should not see a hold if that error is cleared.
Bernard Harris, 31 seconds is a very important milestone in the countdown. What happens then?
It is. Well, let me back up and talk what the crew is feeling inside the time that Dave is talking about checking out the engines. This is the first time that as you're sitting there for the hour, 2 hours that you're in the vehicle, that the vehicle starts moving. You can actually feel the gimbling inside of this, and you know that you're about to go somewhere. And this is serious business. At 30 seconds, of course, you've got your visors down, of course, called at T-minus 2 minutes, and everybody is anxious and ready to get this show on the road.
And isn't it true at this point, too, the shuttle's computers sort of take over and then it becomes an opportunity, well, you're going to fly, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's another critical point, of course, because when you turn over the launch control computers to the onboard computers, then they all have to come up to speed and be able to take over launch.
Copy that, Landworth.
I have trouble reading the electric lights in that clock. What is that, 2 minus 30?
Looks like we're 2:30.
38?
I think we're all having trouble with that when the way the sun is hitting the water.
VOCs go for launch.
The computers are right now making thousands of checks per second of all the orbiter systems. If anything should come up, they will flag it.
What are we seeing here, Dave?
That's the retraction of the gaseous oxygen vent hood. That is a liquid oxygen tank filled with 500,000 gallons of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. That sucks the extra that's venting out of the top away. It's moving away from the orbiter.
So far, everything going according to the script, right?
Everything according to the script.
Yep.
Looks good.
Again, we're looking for the solid.
If they're talking about the engine 2 pitch, I believe they're removing that hold. I believe that's what they just said. All right. The winds of Discovery lift us onto the future.
Just
the visors have been closed and they've gone to oxygen, so they are ready to fly now.
It's just an electric environment here today.
Okay, apparently there's another range safety issue to report. They're going to hold at, oh, I'm sorry. They just say the range was clear? They've removed the hold.
At 31 seconds, we go to a fully automatic computer-controlled launch sequence, checking just thousands of parameters per second. Even checking the main engines after they're lit at 6 seconds, that they reach 90% thrust and everything's normal.
All right. All systems are go. That's the report we're getting from the Launch Control Center here at the Kennedy Space Center. That's the President and the First Lady getting up to see the launch. Let's just listen for the rest of the way.
T-minus 20 minutes, 20 seconds.
You hear mission control?
T-minus 15. T-minus 10, 9, 8. We have a go for engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Houston Discovery, roll program.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery Houston, go at throttle up.
Roger, go at throttle up.
One minute and 50 seconds into the flight. Discovery now at an altitude of 25 miles, traveling at a speed of 2,900 miles an hour. The next event will be burnout and separation of Discovery's twin solid rocket boosters.
Discovery Houston, 2-engine Banjul.
Copy, 2-engine Banjul.
Capcom Susan Still informing the crew that in the event of a single engine failure,
Houston, performance nominal.
Copy, performance nominal.
Discovery could now reach the transatlantic abort site at Banjul. However, telemetry indicating all 3 engines continuing to perform well, and Discovery's performance to this point, 2.5 minutes into the flight, has been as expected. Discovery now traveling at a speed of 3,500 miles per hour at an altitude of 43 miles, downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, 70 miles. All systems are continuing to perform well.
That cloud's going to miss us, isn't it?
3 minutes into the flight, Discovery now traveling at a speed of 3,850 miles per hour, downrange from the Kennedy Space Center at a distance of 86 miles. Just about 5 minutes of powered flight remaining on board.
Three minutes or so into the launch of Space Shuttle Discovery. Everything is nominal, as NASA would put it. The President watching with binoculars, the First Lady beside him. The critical period of this flight everyone talks about is when the solid rocket boosters are attached to that orbiter. I think everybody breathes a sigh of relief who knows a little bit about the Space Shuttle when they separate, don't you, Dave?
That's true. It's a smoother ride afterwards. That's 5 million pounds of thrust that you've let go. You've used it all, and you're on the main engines. It's always critical, though. Let's keep an eye on all this.
What's going on right now, Bernard?
Well, what's happening right now is, as Dave said, we've got really solid rocket motors. Everybody inside is breathing a sigh of relief, and you can tell here at the launch site control center, people are also. And of course, the main reason that's the Challenger accident, and that's the most critical phase of the flight. So now the crew is sort of laying back and taking it all in, but physically, it's still a physical ride, very violent ride, very noisy on the inside. It's hard to talk to your fellow crew members, and right now the G load is beginning to build up, and we'll go just after the solid rocket motors are released down to 1.5 Gs and work our way up to about 3 Gs.
Right now, if we lose one engine, we can still make it across the Atlantic on 2 engines for an abort site.
And that would, in this case, be Banjul, the Gambia. And at what point do we get to what is called the abort to orbit or abort once around mode?
At 4 minutes, 12 seconds, we can make it to orbit without that engine. We'll press on up to orbit. We'd prefer that.
We have press to MECO right now, Dave, is what we just got the call.
We're up to press to MECO at this point. Then we can get all the way to main engine cutoff, a nominal orbit, even if we lose an engine. So we've got redundancy in the main engines right now.
So this is the critical moment when we say you're headed to orbit, right?
That's right.
Unless we lose 2 engines. Then we can still do a transatlantic abort.
Now at a speed of 7,600 miles per hour.
Every inch of altitude you gain is in your favor.
That's right, and speed.
And speed.
Speed and altitude.
Speed is critical to get you safely in orbit. We have to reach what was termed in the old days escape velocity. That's around 17,000 miles per hour to work against the pull of gravity. So that's what we're working at right now.
All 3 main engines still up and running on board at Discovery. That call. was that Discovery could make it to the transatlantic abort site at Banjul in the event that 2 engines should fail. But all 3 engines are continuing to perform as expected. Discovery now downrange from the Kennedy Space Center 385 miles, traveling at a speed of 9,100 miles per hour at an altitude of just about 68 miles.
All right, what they just said is if they lost 2 engines, they could still do a transatlantic.
Still make it transatlantic, and momentarily we should be able to get to orbit even with the loss of 1. Actually, we're past that point. Doing good. Looking very good.
We are going to take a replay of that launch because I got to tell you, that was a spectacular sight, and this picture that we saw today was extraordinary. Not a cloud in the sky here. Let's pull the tape back and take a look.
The flight traveling at a speed of 10,000.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Lisa Malone with her words.
Houston Discovery, roll program.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
The words that have been so anticipated.
Right, you can really feel that roll.
Well, give me a sense of what the educated eye is looking for as you go up and as you watch a launch that you're not inside.
Well, we're looking for a very controlled roll that rolls directly to the azimuth that we desire and then stops and is stable.
That's really critical because that's going to head you in the right direction. Of course, when you lift off with that much power, you want to make sure that you are going in the direction that is necessary for proper insertion. On my flight, we actually had probably the most roll trying to make it to the mirror station. And there were a lot of nervous people because we had to roll about 90 or so degrees and stop, basically on a dime. And at that point, we did go past a little bit, but then corrected and headed off in the right direction.
Again, this is a laboratory going up to orbit. We only want to pull 3 Gs. We throttle the engines back in the last 2 minutes of the ascent to hold the Gs down to 3 because it has delicate instruments. This is also the 25th flight of this vehicle. And we can't do 7.5 Gs like John Glenn did on his first launch on a vehicle meant to go 1 time.
Good point. If you had to make all your experiments able to withstand 9 Gs, you'd have some serious problems. 3 Gs makes it a little more realistic. We're going to watch this to the solid rocket booster separation, which was really rather spectacular. You could see them sort of lazily tumbling through the air before the chutes would deploy and they would land off in the Atlantic and be recovered. Of course, to say they're recoverable is perhaps a euphemism. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on these boosters to make them flight ready again, right, Bernard?
Really are. Once these come off, they are picked up out of the ocean and towed back. Sit in salt water for a long time, and they have to be reversed.
Compared to the sophistication of this vehicle and its boosters, how primitive that flight 36 years ago seemed. Do you know what John Glenn's assignment was at the time that his booster fell away and he was in the craft? His one assignment was to keep his eye on the booster because they wanted to know how far a man could see in space.
It shows where we've come. At that time, we wondered if humans could even see. Their eyeballs might change shape. Could they digest food? Would their blood pressure be regulated? We had basic questions. We've gone so far beyond that in our research now.
All right. Well, in New Concord, Ohio, they have been watching this with probably as much anticipation as any place on the planet. Our Jeff Flock is there. Jeff, were there some cheers in that auditorium there?
Miles, what a thrill when this happened. I want to show you the scene, what happened inside this gymnasium. This is John Glenn's old college, Muskingum College, and let's just listen to it as it unfolded. Former principal at John Glenn High. What was going through your mind at that moment?
Well, that was great. That was the excitement. That was just absolutely fantastic. I was here as a student in '62 when John Glenn went off, and I know the anticipation we all felt then, but it seemed like it was greater this time.
Were you scared at all?
Yes, I was scared. I mean, having known him personally and still know him as a friend, I had a little bit of apprehension, but boy, was I relieved when I saw that thing go off.
Okay, a veteran and then someone new to it. Catherine Dobner's a student here at Muskingum. You really had a look on your face.
Well, it was, I mean, everyone was cheering, and the whole thing I kept thinking of is, he's not up there yet. You know, like, just anything could happen between now and then. And so it was like, until I couldn't see it, it was like, okay, I'm waiting. I couldn't cheer yet. The whole time, my heart, like even my heart's still pounding from it because it was just so amazing just to hear everyone scream and like the whole reaction.
Yeah, pins and needles here, obviously. Mr. Cronkite remembers all of the delays when John Glenn went up last time, and we thought we were going to have a repeat of that here for a moment, but folks that had been through that were kind of reminiscing about that, but everybody very happy here at his old college. We'll leave you with that shot that we had out there that kind of gives you a perspective of where we are here in Ohio, in the middle of America. John Glenn on his way, and they're very happy here in New Concord.
Jeff Flock, thank you very much. A little slice of Ohio, the land of astronauts, apparently, for some odd reason. We haven't figured that out yet. Maybe we'll get an answer before the end of the day. We have one more replay to show everyone here. This one pointed in the opposite direction. Let's take a look as we look at...
Another one of our
Go, baby, go. 36 years ago, those are the words we all remember, Walter.
Yeah. Oh. I was almost speechless that day. Not quite as speechless as when man landed on the moon. I couldn't think of anything to say except gee whiz.
It's hard to come up with words to match the occasion.
Oh,
yeah.
Now, Dave Wolf, you brought some old newspapers here, is that right?
That's right. Stumbled across a few things in the last few weeks. First of all, a copy of the Griffin George Daily News from February 20th, 1962.
All right.
We might remember this.
Yeah.
You could read that headline.
Is that where you were at the time?
That was the launch day. I was 5 years old. The average age of the crew right now that's going in orbit was 5 years old that day. He felt fine, tremendous.
All right.
I think we all remember that. I was about 6 years old at the time, and was inspired by what was going on in the space program to do what I'm doing today.
Walter, would you sign that copy for me?
Oh, I'd be honored to. I don't know why I'm entitled to do that, but I certainly
All right.
shall.
On that note, we will take a break, and but before we do that, we're going to go to JSC first, or after. All right, we're going to take a break. When we return, we'll check in with Houston. Tony Clark in Houston. Control of the shuttle has shifted there, and that's where we'll check in and see how things are going there. Some 15 minutes, 7 seconds into John Glenn's second flight into orbit. Everything seems to be working perfectly well on the Space Shuttle Discovery. A fairly flawless picture here at the Kennedy Space Center. I don't know how you could make it look prettier than that.
That's just
Can you come up with anything? I don't think so.
No. Wonderful fun.
All right.
Do it at night.
I get more nervous watching than being in it.
It is pretty.
Let's move it along to Houston, which is where NASA has moved things along, so to speak. Control of this mission, of course, taken care of all throughout its 9 days at the Johnson Space Center. CNN's Tony Clark is there. Tony?
Miles, you're looking at a shot of Mission Control in the center, and you can just barely see her. She's in a light-colored jacket. That is Linda Ham. She is the flight director. She has the operational control of this flight. And to her right is, in the dark jacket, is Susan Still. She is an astronaut. She flew twice on missions last year. She is the voice of Mission Control, both to the shuttle and the voice of the shuttle to Mission Control. It was interesting watching as the launch was being on hold, all of the 35 or 40 or so people who were sitting at consoles patiently waiting. And then when the launch happened, it was interesting to note that there are about 7 or 8 TV monitors in here showing the liftoff itself, but no one was looking at those. All of the flight controllers were looking at their screens, data on their screens, monitoring how the liftoff was going of Discovery, because as you know, about 30 seconds into the launch, all of the control shifts from Florida to here, and it will remain here until the shuttle lands. Miles?
Tony, give us an idea of what's in store in the next day or so for this mission. It's a 9-day mission. There's a lot to talk about. What's on tap right away?
Well, you know, one of the things that gets deployed very early on is the little communication satellite, a little military communication satellite. That will be interesting a couple of days from now. The Spartan satellite will be deployed. That is going to to look at the sun and the sun's corona, because the effects of eruptions on the sun have an effect on electrical grids, satellite communication here in the United States, and then there are a whole host of medical experiments that will be performed in the Spacehab laboratory that is inside the payload base. Just shortly after they get on orbit, they will open those payload bays, and that's when the experiments begin being exposed. They start turning on systems the rest of the day, getting everything activated. So it's still a lot to be done today.
And let's talk, when they open those payload days for a very specific reason, Bernard Harris, that has a lot to do with the radiating heat into space. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it sure does. And that was my job on the last mission, was to open up the payload bay doors and also to bring out the antenna for communications. The doors actually have the radiators, and which to radiate heat. Many people think that it's cold in space, and that's true, and it's hot in space, but it's even hotter in the cabin because of all the electronics and avionics, computers. They give heat. We pull that heat off, and we run it through the radiators and radiate that into deep space, and that keeps the spaceship cool.
You know, one of the things we hear sometimes about, but which astronauts sometimes are reluctant to talk about, is, well, the NASA euphemism is space adaptation sickness. And this is when that comes to bear, and this is the most critical time, isn't it, Bernard?
Well, it actually starts on the pad. We have learned over the last 30 years, as you're sitting there for 3 hours or so in that recumbent position, you have this fluid shift from your legs down to your head, and that begins that process. And then you go in orbit under these G loads, and then 8.5 minutes later, you are exposed to zero gravity, and yes, this is where 60% of the crew members will experience the most common space adaptation syndrome, that is space motion sickness. As the medical doctor on board our flight, it was my job to make sure that the crew was stable during that point, because they have a lot of activities to do during that day.
Without naming names, was it a particularly rough ride for the crew, or is it typically okay?
It's typically okay. And when I say 60%, that varies. You know, some people just have a little sensation in their stomach. Others will outright, have to use their bags on orbit. For the most part, you fly the second time and it's much better.
Would you concur on that one, Dave?
Yeah, I concur. This is an interesting time in orbit. It's very busy. They're converting this rocket ship into a science laboratory. Everybody is active. They're getting out of their spacesuit. There's a lot of movement. It becomes essentially a kelp bed of spacesuits floating around. And at the same time, they're adapting to space. Pedro Duque, for instance, is his first time in space. And he needs to get adjusted, but he still has a big job to do.
Absolutely, yeah. I would think, let's take a look at the president, by the way. He's at the Launch Control Center, taking a walk through. He was on the roof watching the launch from a little better perch than we have right now. Let's take a look at those pictures if we can. And he expressed some jitters before the actual, I guess he's in a car on his way there. Is that appears to be a shot from the blimp. In any case, the space adaptation sickness, this is a recurring problem. I don't want to dwell on this because I know you guys don't like to talk about it too much, but the fact of the matter is, when you start looking at people, there's the president along with the First Lady, and in the foreground, Daniel Golden, the NASA administrator. We can't hear what they're saying, but clearly offering some congratulations to the entire launch control team. Anyway, back to space sickness. It's been studied for many years now.
That shuttle 7 to 9 times a year.
Let's listen to
They do it safe, and they do it on time, except when planes get in our way. Great space team of America, I want to introduce to you a man who cares about our space program. I want to introduce to you the first president of the United States who had the courage to come down here to NASA Kennedy and watch a shuttle launch in real time. It's all right. I want to introduce to you a man who cares about America's space program, who cares about America's future. And when we had those battles up in Washington, he made sure we're going to build a space station, launch it on November 20th, December 3rd, and 7 launches a year for the next 5 years.
Copy that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you the President of the United States, Bill Clinton.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I have so many things to thank you for today, but among other things, I have to thank you for making the First Lady very happy, because about a year ago she said, you know, we need to make a list of all the things we want to do before we leave office. And I said, okay, what's on your list? She said, you have to take me to a space launch. I want to go. We didn't have the courage to come here. We had confidence in you and pride in America and a conviction that our space program is good for the United States and good for the world. And I want to thank you today because you made all of us terribly proud. Let me also say that because of the intense interest in this, in the media and among ordinary citizens, the American people have had a unique opportunity today to see what you do, not just at the moment of launch, but in the weeks and months and years that preceded all the hard work and all the preparation. And now they will learn over the next few days all the things that are being done in space that advance not only our mission in space, but the quality of our life here on Earth. And all of that, too, has been made possible. The last thing I'd like to say is it has been immensely impressive and important to me to have the chance to work with NASA over the last 6 years and see the revolution which has been undertaken, so that now you can, on virtually the same budget you had 6 years ago, do 8 launches a year instead of 2, and continue to explore the outer frontiers of space. I thank you for all of that. America is very, very proud of you today. Thank you, and God bless you.
The first President of the United States to witness a space shuttle launch, only the second President of the United States to be here for an actual launch. John Kennedy never got an opportunity. I'm sure he would have liked to have come and seen one.
I'm sure he would have.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, some final thoughts. Bernard?
Well, I guess I would like everybody to know that, you know, we're here for John Glenn, but they've got a long road ahead of them the next 9 days. They'll be working in the Spacehab module that was commercially developed, of course, as part of NASA's new initiative to get commercial involvement. 83 experiments. That's going to be a tough mission, but they're up to it.
And it's down to the 5-minute increments. Dave, any closing comments?
Yes, this is a typical multinational scientific mission, typical of the kinds of things we'll be doing on the International Space Station that we begin launching in about 3 weeks. One element from Russia, another from America 2 weeks later. It's going to be an amazing 5 years building this station and operating it for 20 years as we conduct research in orbit.
Gentlemen, thank you all. Walter, it was a distinct pleasure and an honor.
I think we can say one more time that this broadcast was dedicated to John Holloman, who was a space reporter until he died, unfortunately, in an accident a few weeks ago. I think, Miles, you did a great job. John would be proud of you.
I think he was watching somewhere. Hope he enjoyed the show. Holy cow, what a sight, he probably was saying. Thanks very much to all of you for being with us, and we will continue our coverage all throughout the mission. As always, stay with CNN.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Houston Discovery, roll program.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Roger, go ahead, throttle up.
It's always critical, though. Let's keep an eye on all this.
What's going on right now?
1. Booster ignition.
One minute and 50 seconds into the flight, Discovery now at an altitude of 25 miles, traveling at a speed of 2,900 miles an hour.